I want to touch, Professor Laruelle, with France's long tradition of having Russian immigrants, having Russian citizens or descendants living in France as part of the tradition. You even say that in one of your papers that Russian was taught in elementary school until very recently in French schools. But does the presence of the Russian population play an important role in shaping the Franco-Russian relationship?
Yeah, that's the immigration and the children of immigration really play an important role in connecting France to Russia, and they also play a role in what Jean-Yves just described, also in this kind of ideological resonance that is created between some part of the French political spectrum and Russia. So you know that there were like hundreds of thousands of Russian immigrants fleeing the Bolshevik Revolution all over Europe, and the group going to Paris, and not only to Paris, to several other regions in France was quite important. And so they settled, they really played an important role in the French cultural life all over the 20th century. And that's interesting to see how they progressively began playing this role of mediating between France and Russia. And we can see that at different levels. First, we see that all the diaspora association, the Russian Diaspora Association, have been partly retaken control by Moscow. At the beginning, of course, they were totally independent, and as Jean-Yves said, they were like the French far right. They were very anti-communist by definition because they fled the country. But in the 2000s, like 10 years ago, once Putin arrived in power and began kind of courting the diaspora, it really played a role, and Russia began funding a lot of this Russian association under the notion that they all belong to this Russian world, which is one of the big theme of the regime in Moscow. So this association began really playing a role of representing, in a sense, Russia's perception with their own nuances and differences. And there are some associations that are really resisting also Moscow's influence, that don't want that really kind of say, we are coming from this immigration, we are not linked to what is happening now in Russia. So there are some room of maneuver, but let's say that globally they became more connected to Moscow. And among all these associations, we also have this tradition of having quite visible Russian aristocratic families playing really a role in the French cultural landscape.
It's more accepted there than in Russia.
Who are very well integrated in the French system, and that who got also courted by the Russian regime. And so several of these aristocratic families were kind of given symbolic recognition by chairing some cultural associations that are funded by Russia. And so one of the good examples we had is in 2014 during the Ukrainian crisis, so after Russia's annexation of Crimea and the insurgency in Donbass and all the tensions between Russia and Europe, there was a petition signed by 100 big names of the Russian immigration in France called the Russian Bridge, and trying to kind of defend the Russian perspective against the Ukrainian one, and trying to lobby for this Russian perception of the conflict in the French political landscape. So that's where we could really see them as, in that case, instrument of the regime. And then they also play an interesting role because they are very well connected to French businesses and big firms that are working in Russia. And I think it's really important to realize that almost all the big French firms, those who are part of what we call CAC 40, which is the French benchmark stock exchange market index. So all the big French firms, they are involved in Russia. They have businesses in Russia. And very often the children of immigrants are sometimes playing an important role in making the connection between politics, business, and Russia. And so they are, for example, one of the main kind of lobbying association called the Dialogue Franco-Russe, the Franco-Russian Dialogue, was led until recently by children of a Russian immigrant who really had really impressive connection to some political party, but also to the business world. Something also that we have, which is coming from this immigration, is that there are two quite powerful Orthodox charity foundations that are very active in France, both of them led by some oligarchs very close to Putin, one led by Vladimir Yakunin, who was the head of the Russian railways until 2015, and a very close friend of Putin, and the other by Konstantin Malofeyev, who is a communication business oligarch. very monarchist, openly funding the insurgency in Donbass. And so both these Orthodox Charity Foundation are quite active in France. They have Russian émigrés as part of their board. Some of them are promoting this Russian narrative of conservative values, Russia as the savior of the Christian identity of Europe. So they are quite visible. And linked to that, and that will be my last point, the Russian Orthodox Church is also quite active in France. First, because they try to retake over all the Orthodox churches and parishes that were belonging to the Russian immigration and to the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. So there was, during at least a decade, several fights and really with legal proceedings by the Moscow Patriarchate trying to retake control over the Orthodox churches in France. Sometimes they failed, sometimes they succeeded. For example, the big Orthodox cathedral in Nice in the south of France got retaken by the Moscow Patriarchate.
Because it was held by the
It
Istanbul...
was belonging to the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. That was either independent or under the Constantinople Patriarchate.
I see.
Yeah.
And they succeeded in Nice.
They succeeded in Nice, they failed in Biarritz, so depending on each case was quite specific. And since the mid-2000s, there was this kind of big project organized by the Kremlin and the Russian Orthodox Church to build the biggest Orthodox cathedral in Europe, in Paris, in a very central neighborhood. It created a lot of discussion in France, and it succeeded, it worked, and so the Orthodox cathedral got inaugurated in 2016 by the Patriarch himself. Putin was planned to come, but he didn't come at the end. It was a moment of tension between France and Russia over Syria. So it was a huge diplomatic success for France and really a sign of Russia's kind of soft power in the region. And that, I think, it's clearly showing how much, from the Russian perspective, Paris, because it's symbolically important and because of the Russian immigration past, is really a place where Moscow wants to kind of display its soft power.